My name is Margaret, and I am 67 years old. As a retired family archivist, I spent my career meticulously preserving ancestral records and upholding the truth of family narratives. When my beloved husband Arthur was diagnosed with terminal cancer, I dedicated myself to his care with the same precision I brought to my work. For 2 exhausting years, I was his constant companion, managing every medical appointment, every medication schedule, every moment of comfort I could provide during his decline. Together, we had built a $4 million estate through decades of hard work and careful planning, and Arthur had always been clear about his wishes. Our 3 children, Robert, Lisa, and David, would inherit equally sharing in the legacy we had built together. Then came the will reading that shattered my world. Robert, my eldest son, walked into that lawyer's office with a smugness I had never seen before. With theatrical confidence, he produced a will that had supposedly been signed just weeks before Arthur's death, when my husband was heavily medicated and barely coherent. This new document granted Robert 60% of our estate, $2.4 million, while relegating Lisa and David to 20% each. I cared for Dad the most, Robert declared with breathtaking audacity, despite the fact that his visits during Arthur's illness had been brief and infrequent, usually coinciding with requests for money to cover his mounting debts. When I questioned this impossible document, he looked at me with cold contempt. "You're losing your mind, Mom. You have no humanity to see my sacrifice. My integrity, my family, my life's work, everything I had believed in was being twisted into a weapon against me." I felt utterly discarded, dehumanized, profoundly disrespected by the son I had raised and protected. Yet as despair threatened to consume me, something deeper stirred within my archivist's soul. What Robert, his wife Sarah, and their corrupt lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, didn't know was that I had been keeping meticulous records throughout Arthur's illness. Personal journals detailing every doctor's visit, every moment of lucidity and confusion, every interaction with our children. Most crucially, I had audio recordings that captured Robert's manipulation attempts, his cruel exploitation of his father's weakened state, and Arthur's confused medicated responses. This time, their fraud wouldn't just unravel. It would expose their monstrous cruelty and reclaim Arthur's true legacy, proving that truth always triumphs over malice. 3 weeks after Arthur's funeral, when the shock of the will reading had settled into a dull, persistent ache, I knew I had to confront my children about what had happened. I arranged what I hoped would be a family meeting, a chance to discuss the obvious inconsistencies in this new will and to honor Arthur's true wishes for our family. Robert arrived at my house with Sarah, his wife of 15 years, both of them carrying themselves with a confidence that immediately put me on edge. Gone was any pretense of grief or family solidarity. Robert's face held a smugness I had never seen before, while Sarah's expression was coldly calculating, as if she were attending a business negotiation rather than a family discussion. "Well, Mom," Robert began before he had even fully settled into the living room chair where Arthur used to sit. "I hope you've had time to accept the reality of Dad's final wishes. This inheritance dispute needs to end. It's embarrassing for everyone involved." The casual cruelty of his words took my breath away. "Robert," I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay composed, "your father's true wishes were for equal distribution among you 3 children. We discussed this countless times over the years. This new will makes no sense, and the timing is incredibly suspicious." Robert's face hardened into an expression I had never seen from my own son. Mom, Dad knew I was the most responsible. I sacrificed the most for this family. You're losing your mind if you think anything else. This $4 million estate is mostly mine, as it should be. You're just too old and emotional to understand business decisions." Sarah leaned forward with practiced concern. "Margaret Robert gave up so much over the years. You were too busy with your archives and your caregiving to notice his contributions. Maybe you're just not seeing things clearly anymore." The implication was unmistakable. They weren't just claiming Arthur had changed his mind. They were suggesting I was mentally incompetent, unable to understand or remember what had actually happened during my husband's final months. "Robert," I said, my voice growing stronger with indignation, "you visited your father perhaps a dozen times during his entire illness. Most of those visits lasted less than an hour, and half of them ended with you asking for money. Your business debt, that $150,000 you owe, that's not Dad's responsibility or justification for stealing from your siblings." Robert's face flushed with anger. "You have no humanity to see my sacrifice. You don't understand the pressure I've been under, the deals I've had to make, the reputation I've had to maintain. Sarah and I have expenses, obligations. Dad understood that. He knew I needed the resources to succeed." Before I could respond, Lisa burst through the front door, her face streaked with tears of rage. David followed close behind, his jaw set with an anger I had rarely seen from my usually gentle youngest son. "You greedy bastard," Lisa screamed at Robert, her voice echoing through the house. "You manipulated Dad when he was dying. You have no humanity. How could you steal from your own siblings?" David's response was quieter, but no less furious. "I can't even look at you, Robert. You're dead to me. What you've done to this family is unforgivable." But as my younger children directed their rage at Robert, I realized with growing horror that their anger wasn't bringing us together against his fraud. Instead, it was fracturing our family even further. Lisa and David were so consumed with their betrayal by Robert that they couldn't focus on the larger issue of proving the will was fraudulent. Their pain was driving them away from each other and away from me. Robert seemed to take satisfaction in their anger, as if their emotional responses proved his point about family dysfunction. "See what I mean," he said to Sarah loud enough for all of us to hear. "This family can't handle business decisions rationally. Dad was smart to put someone responsible in charge." Sarah nodded sympathetically, then began her own calculated assault. "It's really sad to see everyone so upset. Robert and I are just trying to honor Arthur's final wishes. We're worried about Margaret's mental state, though. She seems confused about basic facts, and she's been hoarding financial documents. We think she might need professional evaluation." The words hit me like physical blows. They weren't just stealing Arthur's legacy. They were actively working to discredit my sanity, to make me appear incompetent and unreliable. Every grieving widow's fear of being seen as a confused old woman was being weaponized against me by my own son. Over the following weeks, Robert and Sarah launched a systematic campaign to undermine my credibility in our community. They spread rumors that I was mentally unfit and obsessed with money, painting themselves as concerned family members dealing with an elderly relative's decline. They posted photos on social media of expensive purchases, luxury cars, and extravagant vacation plans, always with captions about Dad's generosity and new opportunities. The message was clear. They were the rightful inheritors, living the life Arthur had intended for them. Most devastatingly, Robert began claiming that my beloved family home, the house where Arthur and I had raised our children and built our life together, was part of his 60% inheritance. He threatened eviction proceedings, suggesting that I was occupying property that rightfully belonged to him. "The house is in the estate, Mom," he said during one particularly cruel phone call. "Dad left it to me as part of my larger share. You'll need to make arrangements to move somewhere more appropriate for someone your age. Maybe one of those senior living communities. Sarah's found some nice places with good security and medical supervision." I hung up the phone that day, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my 67 years. My husband was dead. My eldest son had become a stranger, consumed by greed. My younger children were too angry and hurt to offer support, and the life I had built over decades was being systematically dismantled by people who claimed to love me. But as I sat in Arthur's chair that evening, surrounded by the family photos and memories that Robert wanted to take from me, I felt something harder and more determined beginning to grow. They thought they could manipulate an old woman's grief, exploit her isolation, and steal her husband's legacy without consequences. They were about to discover how wrong they were, because a family archivist never stops documenting truth, and I had been recording their deception from the very beginning. The harassment escalated with methodical precision. Robert and Sarah weren't content with simply claiming their fraudulent inheritance. They demanded complete access to every document, every record, every piece of evidence that might challenge their narrative. Robert arrived at my door one morning with Sarah and a briefcase full of legal papers. "Mom, we need to review all of Dad's personal papers and your caregiving logs," he announced with the authority of someone who believed he now controlled my life. "Mr. Jenkins says we need to verify facts and document expenses for the estate settlement." Sarah's smile was cold and practiced. "We're just trying to make sure everything is properly accounted for, Margaret. You understand how important accuracy is in these situations." I watched my son riffle through Arthur's personal letters, his medical records, the journals I had kept during his illness, treating these precious documents like business files to be audited. Robert showed no reverence for his father's privacy, no respect for the intimate details of a man's final struggle with terminal illness. "These logs are excessive, Mom," Robert said, flipping through pages of careful notes I had made about Arthur's pain levels, medication schedules, and moments of clarity. "It looks like you were obsessing over every detail. That's not normal caregiving behavior." Sarah posted regularly on social media during this period subtle messages that painted me as difficult and unreasonable. "Some people just can't accept change," she wrote. "It's hard when elderly family members become stubborn and refuse to accept reality. Praying for wisdom and patience during difficult family transitions. The implication was clear to anyone who knew our situation. I was the problem, the unreasonable old woman who couldn't accept her deceased husband's final wishes. But the moment that shattered my remaining illusions about Robert's character came when I overheard a phone conversation he thought was private. I had gone upstairs to retrieve more documents for their review when I heard Robert's voice carrying from the kitchen below. "The old lady thinks she can stop me," he was saying, his voice filled with cruel amusement. "The altered will is solid. Who cares about some dusty old family history? I'll be rich, and she can spend her last years in some nursing home where she belongs." Sarah's laughter in response was like ice in my veins. "Your mother's always been too sentimental about the past. She needs to focus on reality. You've earned this inheritance, Robert. You've worked harder than Lisa or David ever did." Standing on the stairs, listening to my son mock my life's work and dismiss my future with such casual cruelty, I finally understood what I was truly facing. This wasn't just about money or inheritance disputes. This was about a fundamental lack of humanity, a willingness to destroy the woman who had given him life for the sake of financial gain. That night alone in my house, I made the decision to reveal a truth I had kept hidden for over 20 years. A secret so painful that I had never told Arthur, never told anyone, because I had believed I was protecting my son's future. When Robert was 32 years old and building his career as a financial consultant, he had been involved in a serious ethical misconduct incident. A client had trusted him with their retirement savings money meant to secure an elderly couple's final years. Robert had manipulated their investment portfolio, skimming funds for his own use and falsifying reports to cover his theft. When the fraud was discovered, Robert faced criminal charges that would have destroyed his career and sent him to prison. The elderly couple he had victimized were devastated, their retirement security gone, their trust in financial institutions shattered. I had spent over $100,000 of my own inheritance money to quietly compensate his victims and convince them not to press charges. I had used my skills as an archivist to help create a paper trail that obscured Robert's involvement, fabricating financial records that painted the losses as market fluctuations rather than theft. Most painfully, I had convinced Arthur that Robert was simply going through a difficult period and needed our support, not knowing the true extent of our son's crimes. Arthur had been proud of Robert's eventual recovery and business success, never knowing it was built on money I had provided and victims I had silenced. I had kept this secret because I believed Robert had learned from his mistakes, that he had grown into a better man. I had sacrificed my own financial security and compromised my professional ethics because I couldn't bear to see my son's life destroyed. Now, listening to him plot my own destruction with such casual malice, I realized that my sacrifice had taught him the wrong lesson. Instead of learning integrity and accountability, he had learned that his mother would always protect him from consequences, that manipulation and theft were acceptable as long as he didn't get caught. When I tried to subtly reference his past struggles during our next conversation, hoping to remind him of my sacrifices and appeal to whatever conscience he might have left, his response was brutal. "Mom, you're always trying to make me feel guilty with your so-called sacrifices. Your past choices are your own business. Sarah says you're just trying to manipulate me and ruin Dad's memory with your wild accusations." Sarah's response was equally dismissive. "Honestly, Margaret, you're getting quite paranoid about all this. We're actually worried about your mental health. You seem to be inventing history to make yourself look like some kind of martyr." A week later, I received a formal proposal from Mr. Jenkins, their corrupt lawyer. The letter was typed on official letterhead, designed to intimidate and silence me once and for all. Mrs. Margaret Johnson, the letter read, "In the interest of avoiding costly and emotionally damaging litigation, my clients are prepared to offer a compassionate resolution to this matter. If you will sign the enclosed agreement acknowledging Robert Johnson's rightful ownership of the family estate and accept a settlement of $50,000 for your housing and care needs, my clients will agree not to pursue legal action for obstruction of probate or elder abuse related to your harassment of the rightful heirs." The letter went on to detail the potential consequences of refusing their generous offer expensive court battles. I couldn't afford public hearings that would expose my mental instability and the possibility of guardianship proceedings that would strip away my independence entirely. $50,000. They were offering me $50,000 from the $4 million estate Arthur and I had built together, money that was supposed to be mine and my children's inheritance. They were treating me like a nuisance to be bought off, a problem to be solved with the smallest possible payment. But what hurt most was the realization that Robert had learned to use my own love against me. He knew I would do anything to avoid destroying the family, to prevent public scandal, to protect Arthur's memory. He was counting on my maternal instincts and my desire for peace to make me accept this insulting settlement and disappear quietly from his life. As I sat in my kitchen that night, reading their ultimatum over and over, I felt something cold and determined settle in my chest. They thought they could exploit a grieving widow's vulnerability, manipulate an old woman's desire for family harmony, and steal a lifetime's worth of work without consequences. They had forgotten that I wasn't just a mother or a widow. I was a professional archivist who had spent decades uncovering truth and preserving it for future generations, and I had been documenting their fraud from the moment it began. The final assault on my dignity came with the cold efficiency of a legal execution. 2 months after the fraudulent will reading, I received a formal letter from Mr. Jenkins that made my blood run cold. Mrs. Margaret Johnson. The letter began, "This office has been retained to inform you of a temporary restraining order that has been issued against you by the Superior Court. Based on credible reports of harassment, erratic behavior, and threats related to the estate proceedings, you are hereby prohibited from contacting Robert Johnson, Sarah Johnson, or any members of their immediate family." The legal language was deliberately intimidating, designed to make me feel like a criminal. According to this document, my attempts to discuss Arthur's true will, my efforts to preserve family unity, my very presence in my children's lives had been reframed as stalking and harassment. But the cruelest provision was the inclusion of Lisa and David in the restraining order. My younger children, who were also victims of Robert's fraud, were now legally protected from their own mother's contact. Robert had somehow convinced the court that I was a danger to all my children, a deranged old woman whose grief had made her unstable and threatening. The order was comprehensive and devastating. I was banned from approaching any of my children's homes, their workplaces, or even my grandchildren's schools. If I violated these restrictions, I would face immediate arrest and prosecution. In the eyes of the law, I had become a stranger to my own family, a threat to the children I had raised and loved. Despite the legal risks, despite the humiliation and fear, I couldn't let it end like this. I spent days putting together one final appeal to whatever humanity might remain in my eldest son. I created a photo album filled with memories of Robert's childhood pictures of him and Arthur working together family celebrations where we had all been happy and united. I wrote a letter that poured out my heart, recounting the bedtime stories I had read to him, the Little League games Arthur and I had attended, the pride we had felt watching him graduate from college. I reminded him of family traditions, of inside jokes, of the thousands of small moments that make up a lifetime of love. I left the package on Robert's doorstep, anonymously, my hands shaking as I placed it there. It was my final plea, my last attempt to reach the little boy I had raised, to remind him of who we had been to each other before greed poisoned everything. 3 days later, Sarah posted a photo on social media that destroyed what remained of my hope. She had photographed my album torn and scattered across their dining room table like garbage. The caption read, "Cleaning out the clutter. Some people just can't let go of the past, moving forward from negativity and desperate attempts to manipulate." The photos I had treasured, the memories I had carefully preserved, had been destroyed with the same casual cruelty they had shown me. But it was the comments on the post that truly broke my heart. Family, friends, and relatives who had known me for decades liked the post and added their own observations about my obsession and inability to move on. Robert's response came as a text message, cold and final. "Consider this closed, Mom. You lose. Don't contact us again, ever. You're causing too much trouble with your accusations." The word lose hit me like a physical blow. My son was treating our family's destruction like a game he had won a business deal he had successfully negotiated. The woman who had given him life, who had protected him from consequences, who had sacrificed her own integrity to save his career, had become nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. Sarah continued her campaign of character assassination, calling mutual acquaintances to share her concerns about my mental health. She painted herself as the dutiful daughter-in-law, dealing with a mother-in-law's tragic decline, someone who was bravely protecting her family from an increasingly unstable elderly relative. But the cruelest blow came from my own grandson, Ethan Roberts' 16-year-old son. When I encountered him at the grocery store, this boy I had babysit and spoiled and loved looked at me with the same cold indifference I had seen in his father's eyes. "Grandma, you're acting crazy," he said loud enough for other shoppers to hear. "Why don't you just die already? You're embarrassing our whole family." Those words from the mouth of my own grandchild felt like the final nail in my coffin. I had become the villain in their story, the crazy grandmother whose removal made their lives better and more peaceful. Within weeks, the legal pressures and social isolation took their toll. A guardianship petition was filed, claiming I was no longer competent to manage my own affairs. Despite my protests, despite the obvious financial motivation behind the action, the court appointed a guardian who immediately moved me into an assisted living facility. My phone was confiscated, my access to financial accounts was restricted, and my personal belongings were inventoried and largely disposed of. I was stripped of my independence, my dignity, and my voice, all under the legal fiction that this was for my own protection. In that sterile facility, surrounded by other elderly people who had been similarly discarded by their families, I finally broke down and revealed the deepest, most guarded secret of my life, the truth about Arthur's death, the secret I had carried alone for 2 years. My beloved husband hadn't died peacefully from cancer, as everyone believed. In his final months, the cancer had spread to his brain, causing rapid cognitive decline and profound confusion. Arthur, the brilliant businessman who had built our empire, had become someone who couldn't remember his children's names, couldn't recognize familiar faces, couldn't make coherent decisions about anything. But I had hidden his condition from everyone, including our children. I had managed his business affairs, answered his correspondence, even attended board meetings in his name, using carefully prepared scripts. I had created the illusion that Arthur remained mentally sharp until the very end, protecting his dignity and his reputation at the cost of my own sanity and health. The will that Robert claimed was legitimate had been signed during Arthur's worst period of confusion, when he could barely understand what he was signing, much less make complex decisions about inheritance. I had the medical records to prove it, documentation of his cognitive decline that no one else had seen. I had kept this secret to protect Arthur's memory, to preserve his image as a competent, dignified man who died on his own terms. But now, Robert was using Arthur's confused, medicated signature to steal from his siblings and destroy his mother, turning my greatest act of love into the weapon that would destroy our family. The irony was so complete, so perfectly cruel, that I could barely breathe. My sacrifice to protect Arthur's dignity was being used to justify my own humiliation. My love for my husband was being twisted into evidence of my supposed incompetence and manipulation. But as I sat in that facility, stripped of everything I had worked for, everything I had protected, everything I had built, I felt something new growing inside me. Not despair this time, but a cold, calculating determination that scared me with its intensity. They thought they had won. They thought they had silenced me forever, taken everything that mattered, destroyed my credibility so completely that no one would ever believe my version of the truth. They were about to learn that a family archivist never stops preserving evidence, and I had been preparing for this reckoning since the day they first tried to erase me from my own family story. The truth was coming, and it would be more devastating than they could possibly imagine. Life inside Memory Lane Gardens was a carefully orchestrated nightmare designed to strip away every vestige of my identity and dignity. The facility itself was pleasant enough on the surface, with its pastel walls and artificial flower arrangements, but beneath the veneer of compassionate care lay something far more sinister. The staff had clearly been influenced by Robert and Sarah's generous donations and their fabricated reports about my mental state. Dr. Reynolds, the facility's director, treated me with the condescending kindness reserved for people who could no longer be trusted with their own thoughts. "Now, Margaret," she would say, whenever I tried to discuss the fraudulent will or my stolen inheritance. "We've talked about this. You're safe here. You don't need to worry about complicated legal matters anymore. That's what family is for." My sharp intellect, honed by decades of archival work, was constantly questioned and dismissed. When I tried to explain the inconsistencies in Arthur's supposed final will, when I attempted to discuss proper documentation procedures, the staff would exchange knowing looks and make notes on their clipboards. "You're a resident now, dear, not a guardian of legacies," one nurse told me with maddening sweetness. "Let's focus on today. Shall we? Would you like to try the art therapy? We have some lovely adult coloring books." My attempts to access my professional materials to contact former colleagues to maintain any connection with my life's work were met with gentle but firm refusal. My personal papers had been secured by my guardian for my own protection. My phone calls were monitored for my safety. My mail was screened to prevent agitation. I was being systematically erased, my professional competence reframed as dangerous obsession, my righteous anger dismissed as senile confusion. The most heartbreaking torture came in the form of carefully orchestrated visits from my grandchildren. Robert and Sarah would bring Ethan and Chloe for brief, highly supervised meetings that were designed to reinforce the narrative of my decline. "Grandma, do you remember who I am?" 16-year-old Ethan would ask, with rehearsed concern, following a script his parents had clearly provided. The question was designed to make me appear confused and disoriented, regardless of how I answered. If I said yes, it proved nothing. If I hesitated even slightly, the staff would make sympathetic notes about my memory issues. If I became emotional about being asked such a question by my own grandson, it was evidence of my instability. Chloe, now 14, would bring comfort items that further reinforced their narrative. "We brought you some coloring books, Grandma," she would say, with forced cheer, as if I were a child who needed simple activities to occupy my declining mind. But the cruelest moment came when Ethan showed me a photograph on his phone. It was a picture of him and Robert standing in front of my beloved family home, holding a bright red sold sign. My sanctuary, the house where Arthur and I had built our life together, had been sold without my knowledge or consent. "Dad says you don't need this anymore," Ethan said with the casual thoughtlessness of youth. "He says it's better for someone young to live there now." I stared at that photo until my vision blurred with tears. 60 years of memories, decades of careful preservation and love, reduced to a real estate transaction. The room where Arthur had died, the kitchen where I had cooked thousands of family meals, the garden where I had taught my children to plant flowers, all of it sold to strangers who would never understand its significance. The public humiliation continued relentlessly through Sarah's social media campaign. She posted regularly about the house sale, celebrating it as a wise financial decision and a fresh start for her family. She shared before and after renderings that showed their plans to completely renovate the property, stripping away every historical detail, every personal touch that had made it our home. Excited to modernize this beautiful property, she wrote beneath photos of proposed changes that would destroy the original hardwood floors Arthur had restored, the period fixtures I had carefully maintained, the architectural details that told the story of 4 generations of our family. My life's masterpiece was being publicly demolished, and I was powerless to stop it. The financial isolation was equally systematic. I discovered that Robert, as my court-appointed guardian, now controlled every aspect of my economic life. My pension payments were automatically diverted to an account I couldn't access. My personal savings had been secured for my care, meaning Robert decided how every penny was spent. When I tried to contact my own lawyer, I was told that my guardian had retained new legal representation that was better suited to handle elder care issues. My attempts to reach former colleagues or professional organizations were blocked by facility staff who claimed such contacts might agitate me. I overheard nurses describing me as a high-maintenance resident whose family rarely visits. The implication was clear. I was a burden, an abandoned old woman whose complaints were symptoms of her condition rather than legitimate grievances. The psychological pressure was designed to make me question my own sanity. Every day brought new examples of my supposed incompetence, my alleged confusion, my imagined paranoia. The staff's gentle condescension was almost worse than outright cruelty because it came wrapped in the language of care and concern. But in my darkest moment, when I was beginning to wonder if they were right about my mental state, an unexpected lifeline appeared. A young orderly named Maria, who cleaned my room each morning, had noticed my distress and taken pity on me. "Mrs. Johnson," she whispered one morning as she pretended to organize my bedside table, "I found this in the storage room. I thought you might like it." She pressed a small worn leather journal into my hands, an old historical diary that had somehow found its way to the facility. As I opened it that evening, my trembling fingers discovered a tiny inscription on the inside cover, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. Eleanor's help. Eleanor. My dear friend and colleague from the Historical Society, a woman who had worked alongside me for decades and knew my professional standards better than anyone. If she had somehow left this message, if she was aware of my situation, then perhaps my hidden camera footage was still accessible. Perhaps the evidence I had gathered was still waiting to be revealed. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't completely alone. Somewhere outside these sterile walls, people who knew the truth were watching, waiting, preparing to act. The truth would emerge. It had to, because the alternative, the possibility that Robert and Sarah would succeed in erasing me completely, was too terrible to accept. 6 months into my imprisonment at Memory Lane Gardens, Robert and Sarah launched their most devastating attack yet. They announced a national family history retrospective exhibit that would showcase their expertise in preserving family heritage and correcting outdated narratives. The irony was breathtaking. My life's work, my decades of meticulous research and documentation, was being reframed as the misguided obsession of a mentally declining woman. Robert, who had never shown the slightest interest in our family's history, was suddenly presenting himself as a visionary historian. The promotional materials were professionally designed and widely distributed. Robert's photograph appeared on conference brochures, described as a genealogical innovator who had revolutionized traditional archival methods. Sarah was featured as a family heritage consultant with expertise in modernizing historical preservation. I learned about the exhibit when a board staff member at the facility turned on the news during dinner. There on the screen was my eldest son, standing behind a podium, speaking to an audience of hundreds about the importance of moving beyond emotional attachments to historical documents. Traditional family archivists, Robert said with practiced authority, often become too personally invested in preserving every detail, regardless of its actual significance. This emotional hoarding can distort the true narrative and create unnecessary confusion for future generations. The camera panned across displays that featured our family's actual documents papers I had spent decades collecting, organizing, and preserving. But they had been recontextualized to support Robert's narrative of modernization and efficiency. My careful chronological arrangements were dismissed as obsessive cataloging. My detailed annotations were described as personal bias that clouded objective analysis. Sarah's portion of the presentation was even more devastating. She spoke with clinical detachment about the dangers of allowing untrained family members to maintain historical records without professional oversight. When elderly relatives become fixated on controlling family narratives, she said, it can create serious problems for younger generations trying to understand their heritage. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is gently remove these responsibilities and place them in more capable hands. The audience nodded thoughtfully as she described someone whose professional dedication had become emotional instability, whose lifetime of expertise had become dangerous obsession. She was describing me, but in language so carefully crafted that it sounded like compassionate concern rather than character assassination. But the cruelest blow came when they showed video testimonials from my own grandchildren. Ethan appeared on screen now, 17, speaking with the confidence of youth about his newfound appreciation for streamlined historical records. My grandmother used to keep everything, he said with a patronizing smile. Every scrap of paper, every old photograph, every document that mentioned our family. But my parents have taught me that true preservation means focusing on what really matters, not drowning in dusty old details. The words hit me like physical blows. This boy I had taught to appreciate his heritage, who had once listened with fascination as I explained the stories behind our family photographs, was now dismissing my life's work as meaningless clutter. Chloe's contribution was shorter, but equally devastating. The camera showed her laughing as she pointed to one of my meticulously maintained ledger books, now displayed as an example of outdated methodology. Grandma used to write everything by hand in these big books, she giggled. It was so slow and old-fashioned. We use digital databases now. Everything's so much faster and easier to search. The implication was clear. My careful handwritten records, my attention to detail, my respect for traditional archival methods were not just outdated, but ridiculous. The younger generation had moved beyond such antiquated approaches, thanks to their parents' guidance. I sat in that sterile facility common room, surrounded by other forgotten elderly people, watching my professional legacy being systematically dismantled on national television. Every principle I had held dear, every method I had perfected over decades of practice was being reframed as evidence of mental decline and professional incompetence. The audience at the exhibit praised Robert and Sarah for their courage in sharing such a difficult family situation for educational purposes. They were being celebrated as experts in family heritage, their credibility built on the ruins of my destroyed reputation. The exhibit was covered by multiple media outlets, all of them presenting the same narrative, a progressive approach to family history that had rescued important documents from the confused control of an aging relative. Robert and Sarah were quoted extensively, their wisdom contrasted with my alleged obstinacy and confusion, but not everyone was convinced by their performance. Dr. Harrison Webb, a retired family archivist who had worked with me for over 20 years, watched the exhibit coverage with growing disgust. He remembered me as a meticulous professional whose standards were beyond reproach, whose work had been cited in academic publications and historical societies across the country. Dr. Webb recognized the sophisticated nature of what was being done to me. He had seen similar cases where families used ageism and mental health stigma to steal from elderly relatives, but rarely with such professional polish and public relations savvy. He reached out to Eleanor, my old colleague from the Historical Society, expressing his concerns about what appeared to be a coordinated campaign against my professional reputation. Together, they began quietly investigating the claims being made about my mental competence and the circumstances surrounding Arthur's will. Something is very wrong here, Dr. Webb told Eleanor during one of their conversations. Margaret Johnson was one of the most competent archivists I ever worked with. The woman they're describing on television bears no resemblance to the professional I knew. Eleanor shared his concerns. She had been trying to reach me for months, but her calls were always intercepted by facility staff who claimed I was too unwell for outside contact. Her letters were returned unopened, marked as inappropriate correspondence that might agitate the resident. But Eleanor was nothing if not persistent. She began documenting the inconsistencies in Robert and Sarah's public statements, comparing them with the records she had of my actual work and professional relationships. She was building a case quietly and carefully that would eventually expose the lies being told about my competence and character. As I sat in that facility, watching my life's work being perverted and my grandchildren being used as weapons against my memory, I felt something cold and determined growing within me. They thought they had destroyed me completely, reduced me to a confused old woman whose protests could be safely ignored. But they had forgotten something crucial. A true archivist never stops documenting evidence, and I had been recording their deception since the very beginning. The truth was coming, and when it emerged, it would destroy their carefully constructed lies as thoroughly as they had tried to destroy me. The final financial assault began exactly 1 year after Arthur's death, delivered with a precision that could only have been planned for months. Robert, leveraging his position as my court-appointed guardian, and Sarah's network of professional contacts, launched a coordinated attack designed to strip away the last vestiges of my independence and dignity. The lawsuit papers arrived at the facility on a Tuesday morning, delivered with the cold efficiency of a legal execution. Robert was suing me for $1.5 million, claiming that my harassment and defamatory statements about the inheritance had caused him severe emotional distress and damaged his newly established reputation as a family heritage expert. The legal document was thick with accusations that twisted every attempt I had made to preserve Arthur's true legacy into evidence of my supposed malice and instability. My efforts to contact my other children were described as manipulation attempts. My questions about the will's authenticity were framed as harassment campaign. Even my professional background was used against me, with claims that my archival obsessions had made me dangerous to family harmony. But the lawsuit was just the beginning. Simultaneously, Robert contacted my former employers and professional organizations, spreading the same fabricated narrative about my mental decline that he had used to gain guardianship. He claimed that my recent behavior raised serious questions about my past professional competence, suggesting that my supposed cognitive issues might have affected my work for years. The response was swift and devastating. The prominent family foundation, where I had worked for over 2 decades managing their historical collection, launched an investigation into my past performance. Without allowing me to defend myself or even informing me of the proceedings, they revoked my professional certifications and removed my name from their list of distinguished alumni. My retirement pension, which represented the security Arthur and I had worked decades to ensure, was suspended pending a review of my professional conduct. The retirement fund administrators, faced with Robert's official reports as my guardian, questioned whether I was competent to receive such payments. Most painfully, they stripped away the professional honors I had earned through a lifetime of dedicated service. My name was removed from the Family Archivist Hall of Recognition. The scholarship fund that had been established in my honor was quietly dissolved. 40 years of professional achievement vanished as if they had never existed. The financial pressure mounted with each passing day. Legal bills consumed what little remained in the accounts I could still access. The facilities fees, supposedly covered by my guardian, began accumulating as additional charges that Robert claimed were my responsibility. Then came the eviction notice. Despite my status as a resident of Memory Lane Gardens, Robert claimed that my behavior had become too disruptive for the facility to handle. He arranged for my removal to a much cheaper, overcrowded public facility that specialized in difficult elderly residents. Sarah made sure the eviction was as public and humiliating as possible. She tipped off local media about the troubled elderly woman being removed from private care due to her family's inability to manage her behavior. The news crew captured footage of me being escorted from the facility with my few remaining possessions in plastic bags, the ultimate visual symbol of how far I had fallen. The reporter described me as a former professional who had fallen on hard times due to family disputes and apparent mental health issues. There was no mention of my professional achievements, my decades of service, or the suspicious circumstances that had led to my current situation. My other children's response to my homelessness was perhaps the most crushing blow of all. When contacted for comment, Lisa issued a carefully worded statement expressing concern for my welfare while supporting Robert's decisions as my guardian. "We love our mother," she said, "but we have to trust Robert's judgment about what's best for her care. He's been handling all the legal and medical details because the rest of us just don't have the expertise." David was even more distant, avoiding all contact with reporters and refusing to discuss the situation publicly. When I tried to call him from the public facility where I was now housed, his number had been changed and no forwarding information was provided. But Sarah's celebration of my destruction was the most vicious of all. Using money that had originally come from the sale of my beloved family home, she and Robert purchased a custom-built family heritage center for their property. The structure was designed to house their new collection of professionally curated historical documents, the very papers they had stolen from me and reframed as their own expertise. The dedication ceremony was covered by local media, with Sarah giving interviews about the importance of proper historical preservation. and protecting family legacies from well-meaning but misguided amateur efforts. She spoke about Robert's vision for creating a professional-grade archive that would serve as a model for other families. The building cost over $800,000 money that represented the liquidation of my life's work and the theft of my children's inheritance. But Sarah presented it as evidence of their commitment to preserving family history, a noble cause that justified their control of the estate. "We wanted to create something lasting," she said with practiced sincerity, "something that would honor the family's legacy in a way that amateur efforts simply couldn't achieve." The physical toll of this relentless assault finally overwhelmed my body's ability to endure. The stress, the malnutrition from inadequate facility food, the constant anxiety about my uncertain future, all combined to trigger a massive heart attack that left me unconscious on the floor of the public facilities common room. The paramedics who responded treated me like just another elderly indigent, someone whose life had little value and whose survival was questionable. As they worked to stabilize my heart in the emergency room, I drifted in and out of consciousness, barely aware of the medical activity around me. But in those moments between awareness and oblivion, a buried memory surfaced with startling clarity. I was back in my office 30 years earlier, working on a sensitive family history project that had required absolute discretion. Arthur's grandfather had been involved in a major financial scandal during the Great Depression, embezzling funds from a workers' pension plan that left dozens of families destitute. Arthur's father had spent his entire adult life quietly compensating the victims and covering up the crime to protect the family's reputation. I had discovered the truth while researching our family's business history, but Arthur had begged me to bury the evidence. He couldn't bear the thought of his grandfather's crimes being exposed, couldn't face the shame of being associated with such a betrayal of working families. So I had done what I always did for the people I loved. I had buried the truth to protect them. I had falsified family records, destroyed incriminating documents, and created a sanitized version of our family's history that painted Arthur's grandfather as a respectable businessman rather than a thief. Now lying in that hospital bed, I realized the cosmic irony of my situation. I had spent my entire professional life compromising my integrity to protect my family's reputation, and now that same family was destroying me, using the very methods I had taught them through my example. But this memory also gave me something I hadn't felt in months, a sense of purpose. If my family's honor had been built on lies I had helped create, then perhaps it was time for all the lies to be exposed. Perhaps the truth, no matter how painful, was the only thing that could set any of us free. Recovery from the heart attack was slow and painful, but it gave me time to think with a clarity I hadn't possessed since this nightmare began. The hospital room became my sanctuary, a place where I could plan without the constant surveillance and manipulation I had endured at the facilities. It was during those long nights of reflection that I decided to create one final video message, not a plea for mercy, but a methodical presentation of evidence that even my children couldn't ignore or dismiss. A compassionate nurse named Jennifer, who reminded me of my own daughter at that age, helped me record the message on her personal tablet. Jennifer had read about my case in the news and was troubled by the inconsistencies she saw between the confused old woman described in media reports and the articulate, intelligent patient she was caring for. In the video, I laid out the timeline of Robert's fraud with the same precision I had once used to document historical events. I played the audio recordings I had made of his early conversations about changing Arthur's will, his crude calculations about how much money he could extract from the estate, his callous remarks about my future care. "Listen to his voice," I said into the camera, my own voice steady, despite my physical weakness. "Listen to how he talks about his dying father's money, about disposing of his mother like an inconvenient burden. This is not grief or family responsibility. This is greed, pure and simple. But the most damaging evidence was what I revealed about the will itself. Using my professional expertise, I explained the forensic inconsistencies that proved the document was fraudulent. The paper was wrong, the ink was wrong. Even Arthur's signature showed signs of the tremor that had plagued his final weeks when he was too medicated to understand what he was signing. Most importantly, I revealed the truth about Arthur's mental state during his final months, supported by medical records that Robert thought had been destroyed. Arthur had been suffering from severe cognitive decline due to his cancer treatment periods of confusion and disorientation that made any legal document signed during that time invalid. "My husband was a brilliant man," I said, looking directly into the camera, "but he died confused and frightened, manipulated by his own son into signing away his daughter's inheritance. Robert knew his father wasn't competent to make such decisions, and he exploited that vulnerability for his own gain. Jennifer helped me send the video through a secure channel that would ensure it reached Lisa and David, directly bypassing Robert's control over my communications. We timed the transmission for a moment when Robert would be out of town on business, giving my other children the opportunity to see the evidence privately before deciding how to respond. But we had underestimated the extent of Sarah's surveillance network. Through contacts at the hospital, through monitoring of communications, through the web of people she had convinced to watch for any concerning behavior, from me, she learned about the video before it ever reached its intended recipients. What Sarah did next demonstrated a level of calculated cruelty that took my breath away. She didn't just intercept and delete the video. She had it professionally edited to serve her own purposes, turning my carefully documented evidence into apparent proof of my mental instability. The edited version removed all the factual evidence and supporting documentation, leaving only the emotional moments where I expressed my pain and confusion about my family's betrayal. My voice was subtly altered to sound more desperate and unstable. Background noise was added to create an atmosphere of chaos and mental disturbance. Most devastatingly, Sarah used sophisticated editing techniques to splice together segments from different parts of the recording, creating statements I had never made. Through careful manipulation, she made it appear that I was threatening my family, demanding money, and making wild accusations based on paranoid delusions. Sarah then sold this manipulated video to a national news organization as evidence of my dangerous deterioration. She positioned herself as a concerned daughter-in-law who was reluctantly sharing family tragedy for the greater good of educating the public about elderly mental health. The story aired on a primetime news magazine with the headline, "When Aging Parents Become Dangerous." I watched from my hospital bed as my own words were used to destroy me. On national television, my desperate attempt to share the truth twisted into evidence of my supposed insanity. The narrator described me as a former professional whose knowledge of document manipulation had made her delusions particularly convincing. They portrayed my recordings as fabricated evidence, my professional analysis as the confused ramblings of someone whose career had given her dangerous knowledge about creating false documents. Robert and Sarah's response was swift and devastating. They appeared on the same program for a follow-up interview, presenting themselves as a family in crisis, dealing with a beloved mother's tragic mental decline. This video shows exactly why we had to take legal action to protect ourselves and our children. Robert said, his voice breaking with practiced emotion. "My mother is clearly very unwell, and her professional background has unfortunately given her the skills to create convincing but completely false evidence. We're heartbroken, but we can't allow her delusions to destroy our family. Sarah remained strategically in the background, the grieving daughter-in-law who was too kind to speak publicly about her suffering, but whose pain was evident to anyone watching. She occasionally dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, the picture of someone bearing her burden with dignity and grace. But the most devastating moment came when they brought Ethan on camera for a brief statement. My 18-year-old grandson looked directly into the lens with the innocent concern of someone who genuinely believed he was helping his family. "I love my grandmother," he said softly, "and I hope she gets the help she needs. But we can't let her hurt herself or anyone else with these fantasies. We just want her to be safe and peaceful." The performance was flawless. My family came across as loving relatives, forced to make difficult decisions to protect a mentally ill woman from herself. I was portrayed as the tragic figure whose professional knowledge had been corrupted by dementia, making her both pathetic and dangerous. But Lisa and David's appearance in the same segment was what truly broke my heart. My younger children, who I had hoped might still listen to reason, offered subtle nods of agreement and looks of sympathetic concern. They publicly reinforced Robert's narrative, making it clear they stood with their older brother against their mother's delusions. "We're all hoping for the best," Lisa said carefully, "but we have to prioritize the safety and well-being of the whole family, especially the children." David's statement was even more distant. "Mental illness is a family tragedy. We're grateful for the professional help our mother is receiving, and we hope she can find peace." The story went viral on social media, shared thousands of times, with comments praising my family's courage in dealing with such a difficult situation. I became a cautionary tale about the dangers of untreated mental illness in the elderly, an example of how professional knowledge could be twisted by dementia into something harmful and destructive. But not everyone was convinced by their performance. Dr. Harrison Webb, my former colleague who had been quietly investigating my case, watched the program with growing outrage. As a professional archivist and document examiner, he immediately recognized signs of digital manipulation in the video evidence. Working with Eleanor from the Historical Society, Dr. Webb began a detailed analysis of the recordings that had been broadcast. Their examination revealed clear evidence of editing, splicing, and audio manipulation that proved the video had been deliberately altered to distort my statements. More importantly, Dr. Webb had access to professional databases that allowed him to verify my claims about Arthur's will. His preliminary analysis supported my assertion that the document was fraudulent, created using techniques that someone with archival knowledge would be able to identify. "This isn't just elder abuse," Dr. Webb told Eleanor during one of their strategy sessions. "This is a sophisticated fraud that uses media manipulation and legal intimidation to silence the victim. Margaret Johnson isn't crazy. She's being systematically destroyed by people who know exactly what they're doing." Eleanor shared his concerns and his determination to act. She had known me for over 20 years, had worked alongside me on dozens of projects, and had never seen any evidence of the mental instability my family was claiming. Together, they reached out to legal advocates who specialized in elder abuse cases, offering their professional expertise and documentation as evidence of the conspiracy against me. They were building a case quietly and methodically that would eventually expose the lies being told about my competence and the fraud being perpetrated against my estate. As I lay in that hospital bed, watching my final attempt at truth being twisted into evidence of my supposed madness, I felt something I had never experienced before, a complete understanding of my own powerlessness. But I also felt something else, something colder and more determined. If they thought they had finally silenced me completely, if they believed their manipulation of the media had destroyed my credibility forever, they had forgotten something crucial about the kind of woman they were dealing with. A true archivist never stops documenting evidence, and somewhere in places they didn't know about, the real truth was still waiting to be discovered. The reckoning was coming, and it would be more complete than they could possibly imagine. The federal lawsuit that Dr. Webb and Eleanor filed on my behalf attracted attention far beyond what any of us had anticipated. What had started as a case of family inheritance fraud had become a national conversation about elder abuse document forgery and the sophisticated ways that vulnerable people can be systematically destroyed by those they trust most. The funding for my legal defense came from an unexpected source. Years earlier, I had documented and authenticated a collection of Civil War letters for a private collector. When that collection was sold at auction, following the owner's death, I was entitled to a finder's fee that had been sitting unclaimed in a legal account. Dr. Webb's investigation had uncovered this forgotten asset, providing the resources needed to hire the best legal team available. My lead attorney was Sandra Chen, a veteran prosecutor who specialized in elder abuse cases and had never lost a case involving document fraud. She was joined by Dr. Marcus Rivera, a renowned forensic document examiner whose testimony had sent dozens of white-collar criminals to prison, and Patricia Goldman, an aggressive land titles attorney who had spent decades fighting inheritance fraud. Together, they filed a comprehensive federal lawsuit alleging criminal fraud, forgery, elder abuse, and conspiracy charges that carried both civil and criminal penalties. The case drew national media attention because of the sophisticated nature of the fraud and the viral video that had been used to destroy my reputation. The trial was scheduled to be televised, a decision that Sandra felt was necessary to counter the damage done by the manipulated media coverage. Mrs. Johnson's reputation was destroyed in public, she argued. Justice demands that it be restored in public as well. When the trial began, the courtroom was packed with reporters, legal observers, and advocates who had been following the case. I sat at the plaintiff's table, no longer the broken woman who had been warehoused in a public facility months earlier. The truth was about to be revealed, and I felt a calm determination that surprised me with its strength. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment when Dr. Rivera took the stand to present his forensic analysis of the power of attorney that had given Robert control over my life. Using enlarged photographs displayed on screens throughout the courtroom, Dr. Rivera methodically demonstrated how the document had been forged. He compared the signature on the power of attorney with authenticated samples of my handwriting from my professional logs, pointing out microscopic differences that proved the signature was fraudulent. The pressure patterns are completely inconsistent, he explained to the transfixed jury. Mrs. Johnson's authentic signature shows the steady hand control of someone accustomed to detailed documentation work. The forged signature shows hesitation marks, lifted pen strokes, and tremor patterns that indicate someone attempting to copy an unfamiliar signature. But the forensic evidence was just the beginning. Sandra's most devastating weapon was the unedited audio recordings from my home security system recordings that captured Robert and Sarah planning my destruction in their own words. The courtroom fell silent as Robert's voice filled the space, cold and calculating as he discussed his strategy for seizing my inheritance. The old lady has no idea what's coming, he said on the recording. Once I get power of attorney, I can liquidate everything and she can't stop me. The ancestral land alone is worth over $1.5 million. Sarah's response was equally chilling. Just make sure you get her declared incompetent first. We need documented proof of her mental decline so she can't fight the guardianship. I've already talked to people at the facility about noting her agitation and confusion. The jury listened in horror as my son and daughter-in-law discussed their plans to destroy my credibility, manipulate my medical care, and steal my life's work. Their casual cruelty, their complete lack of remorse, their calculated manipulation of systems designed to protect vulnerable elderly people, all of it was laid bare in their own voices. But perhaps the most damaging recording was one where they discussed their contempt for the land itself, the property that represented 4 generations of my family's history. Who cares about some moldy old farm? Robert laughed on the tape. Mom's obsessed with family history, but I'm going to sell it to developers and make some real money. Let them build a shopping center on her precious heritage. Mr. Jenkins, the corrupt notary who had processed the fraudulent documents, was called to testify about his role in the conspiracy. Confronted with the audio evidence of his complicity, he broke down completely on the witness stand. They offered me $20,000 to notarize the signature without proper verification, he sobbed. I knew it was wrong, but I needed the money. Mrs. Johnson never signed that power of attorney. I watched Robert forge her signature myself. His confession sealed Robert and Sarah's fate, but the most devastating moment was yet to come. When Robert was called to testify in his own defense, the confident, manipulative man who had orchestrated my destruction was nowhere to be seen. Confronted with his own recorded words, his own documented lies, his own systematic cruelty toward the woman who had given him life, he simply fell apart. I never meant, he began, then stopped, his face crumpling as the magnitude of what he had done finally hit him. Oh God, what have I done? What have I done to her? His breakdown was complete and public broadcast to millions of viewers who watched a man confront the full horror of his own actions. He wept uncontrollably, his body shaking with sobs as he finally understood the depth of his betrayal. She sacrificed everything for me, he whispered into the microphone. She saved me when I was young, protected me, loved me, and I tried to destroy her for money. How could I have become this person? How could I have been so cruel? Sarah attempted to flee the courtroom when she saw Robert's confession, but court officers stopped her before she reached the exit. Her own breakdown was different from Robert's, driven not by remorse, but by fury at being caught. She screamed accusations at Robert for his weakness at the court, for persecuting her at me, for refusing to die quietly and leave them in peace. The sight of her being led away in handcuffs, still shouting about the unfairness of it all, was deeply satisfying. But watching Robert's complete psychological collapse was heartbreaking, despite everything he had done to me. Lisa and David sat in the gallery throughout the trial, watching their brother's crimes being exposed, hearing the evidence of how thoroughly they had been manipulated into abandoning me. When Robert's recorded voice filled the courtroom, describing how he had turned them against me through lies and manipulation, they broke down completely. I could see them sobbing, their faces buried in their hands, overwhelmed by shame and guilt for their passive complicity in my destruction. They looked at me across the courtroom with eyes full of remorse, but they didn't approach, perhaps understanding that the chasm between us was too wide to bridge with simple apologies. But for me, sitting in that courtroom watching the truth finally emerge, after months of being treated as a delusional old woman, the dominant emotion wasn't anger or satisfaction. It was profound relief. The nightmare was ending, and justice at long last was being served. The court's verdict was swift and uncompromising. Judge Patricia Morrison delivered the ruling with the kind of moral authority that comes from witnessing profound injustice and having the power to address it definitively. The systematic fraud and elder abuse documented in this case, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed courtroom, represents one of the most calculated and devastating examples of familial financial exploitation I have encountered in my career. The defendants not only stole the plaintiff's inheritance and destroyed her family relationships, but they manipulated legal and medical systems to silence their victim and cover their crimes. Robert was sentenced to 7 to 12 years in federal prison for elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The charges included not just the theft of my inheritance, but his manipulation of the guardianship system and his systematic campaign to destroy my reputation and credibility. Sarah received 5 to 10 years, her sentence somewhat reduced, because of Robert's role as the primary architect of the scheme, though the judge made clear that her participation had been both knowing and enthusiastic. Mr. Jenkins faced immediate disbarment and criminal charges for his role in processing fraudulent documents. His 20-year legal career was over-destroyed by his greed and willingness to participate in elder abuse. But beyond the criminal penalties, the court ordered massive financial restitution. I was awarded not just the full value of my stolen inheritance, including the ancestral land that was worth over $1.5 million, but additional damages for the emotional trauma I had endured and the professional reputation that had been systematically destroyed. Most importantly, Judge Morrison issued a formal statement completely vindicating my character and professional competence. Mrs. Margaret Johnson, she said, looking directly at me, has been vindicated not just legally, but morally. Her lifetime of service as a family archivist, her dedication to preserving authentic historical narratives, and her unwavering integrity have been maliciously attacked by people who exploited her love and trust for their own gain. This court finds that she is not only innocent of the accusations made against her, but that she represents the highest ideals of professional dedication and family devotion. The judge went on to condemn the abuse of elderly people by family members, calling it a betrayal that strikes at the heart of everything we value about family bonds and respect for our elders. She ordered that my case be used as precedent for future elder abuse prosecutions, and that my story be included in training materials for legal and medical professionals. Watching Robert led away in handcuffs was surreal. This man who had controlled every aspect of my destruction for so long was now powerless, facing years of imprisonment for his crimes. As they led him past my table, he stopped and tried to speak to me. "Mom, I'm sorry," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I know I can't undo what I've done. I know I can't give you back the years we lost or take away the pain I caused you. But I want you to know that I finally understand how sick I became, how greed poisoned everything good in me." I looked at him for a long moment, this man who was still my little boy despite everything. What I felt wasn't anger anymore. It was something closer to grief for the son I had lost to his own greed and Sarah's manipulation. "Robert," I said quietly, "I hope you use your time in prison to find your way back to the person I raised you to be. That person is still in there somewhere, buried under all the lies and cruelty. I pray you can find him again." Sarah's reaction to her sentencing was very different. She showed no remorse, only fury at being caught and punished. As they led her away, she turned back to shout at me one final time, This isn't over, Margaret. You think you've won, but you've destroyed your own family. Robert will never forgive you for this." Her words bounced off me harmlessly. I had learned that Sarah's opinion of anything, including my family relationships, had no power over me anymore. But it was Lisa and David's approach after the sentencing that truly moved me. My younger children, who had spent months avoiding me, who had publicly supported Robert's narrative of my mental decline, came to me with faces full of shame and tears. Lisa reached me first, her voice breaking as she tried to find words for her regret. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I was scared and confused, and I let Robert convince me that you were sick. I should have listened to you. I should have investigated. I should have protected you instead of abandoning you." Her apology was raw and genuine, filled with the kind of remorse that comes from truly understanding the magnitude of one's failure. She didn't make excuses or try to minimize her role in my suffering. She simply acknowledged her failure and begged for the chance to make amends. David's apology was quieter but equally heartfelt. "I was a coward, Mom. I knew something felt wrong about the whole situation, but I was afraid to challenge Robert. I was afraid of conflict, so I let you suffer alone. I'll never forgive myself for that." Looking at my children, seeing their genuine remorse and understanding of what they had done, I felt my heart beginning to heal from wounds I thought would never close. "Lisa, David," I said, reaching out to take their hands, "we all made mistakes. Robert's manipulation was sophisticated and convincing. What matters now is that we acknowledge the truth and work to rebuild what was broken. That's going to take time and effort from all of us." The reunion with my grandchildren was more gradual and carefully managed. Ethan and Chloe, now 19 and 17, were deeply traumatized by their father's exposure and imprisonment. They had spent years being coached to reject me, and now they had to process the reality that everything they had been told was a lie. Their first visit to me was supervised by a family therapist who specialized in helping children recover from parental manipulation. Both of them were nervous, confused, carrying the weight of years of programmed rejection that they were just beginning to understand. "Grandma," Chloe said tearfully, "I don't know how to be with you anymore. I used to love you so much, and then Dad and Mom made me believe you were dangerous. Now I don't know what's real." "What's real," I told her, "is that I love you and that love never changed, even when you couldn't feel it. We're going to take this slowly, and we're going to help you remember who you really are, not who you were told to be." The process of rebuilding these relationships was slow and sometimes painful. The children had to confront the reality that their father had manipulated them, used them as weapons against someone who loved them. But children are remarkably resilient, and with good therapy and patient love, they began to rediscover their authentic feelings and memories. Robert's letters from prison became a regular part of my life, though I read them with mixed emotions. His remorse seemed genuine, his understanding of what he had done growing deeper with each letter. He was receiving therapy and working toward a degree in social work, hoping to dedicate his life to helping other families avoid the destructive patterns he had created in his own. "I'll never be able to undo what I did to you," he wrote in one letter, "but I want to spend whatever time I have left making sure other elderly people don't suffer the way I made you suffer. Maybe that's how I can honor the mother who loved me, even when I didn't deserve it." The victory was complete, but it was also bittersweet. I had reclaimed my inheritance, my reputation, and my family relationships, but the cost had been enormous. Years of my life had been stolen. My trust in my own children had been shattered, and the family unit that Arthur and I had worked so hard to build had been irrevocably changed. But as I sat in that courtroom, After the sentencing, surrounded by Lisa and David and the grandchildren who were slowly remembering how to love me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope for the future. The truth had emerged, justice had been served, and healing, though it would take time, was finally possible. 3 years have passed since the trial that changed everything, and my life has become something I could never have imagined during those dark months of isolation and despair. I am not just surviving the aftermath of betrayal. I am thriving in ways that surprise me every day. My ancestral land, the property that Robert tried to sell to developers, has been restored to its former glory, and then some. The house where Arthur and I plan to spend our retirement years has been lovingly renovated, incorporating modern comforts, while preserving every historical detail that tells the story of 4 generations of my family. The gardens that my great-grandmother planted have been restored using heirloom varieties, and the old oak tree, where Arthur proposed to me 60 years ago, provides shade for the picnic table, where my family now gathers for Sunday dinners. This land is more than just property. It's a living testament to the power of truth and the importance of fighting for what matters most. My days are filled with meaningful work and authentic relationships. I've become a respected advocate for elder rights and inheritance protection, speaking at conferences across the country about the sophisticated methods that financial predators use to exploit vulnerable seniors. My memoir, The Legacy They Tried to Steal, has become a bestseller and has helped countless families recognize and address similar patterns of manipulation. The local historical society has established a research center on my property where I work with young historians and genealogists, teaching them the importance of preserving authentic family narratives. It brings me joy to see their enthusiasm for uncovering truth and their respect for the stories that previous generations have left for us to discover. But the greatest transformation has been in my family relationships. Lisa and I have developed a bond that is deeper and more authentic than anything we had before the crisis. She comes to the property every weekend, sometimes staying for days, and we work together in the gardens and archives, sharing stories and rebuilding the connection that Robert's manipulation had nearly destroyed. "Mom," she told me recently, as we sorted through old family photographs, "I know it sounds strange, but I think we're closer now than we ever were before. Going through this nightmare together, seeing how strong you are, learning to fight for what's right, instead of just avoiding conflict, it's changed me in ways I'm still discovering." David's reconnection has been quieter, but equally meaningful. He visits regularly, often bringing his tools to help with maintenance projects around the property. We don't talk much about the past. Instead, we focus on building something positive in the present. His steady presence and willingness to contribute without fanfare speaks to the man he's becoming as he processes his own role in what happened. The relationship with my grandchildren has blossomed beyond my wildest hopes. Ethan, now 22, has developed a passion for historical preservation and is considering a career in archival work. He spends his summers working on the property, cataloging documents and learning the techniques I've perfected over decades. "Grandma," he said to me last month as we worked together in the archive room, "I want to make sure our family's real story is preserved forever. Not the lies Dad tried to create, but the truth about all of us, including our mistakes and how we learned from them." Chloe, now 20, has inherited my love of documentation and storytelling. She's studying journalism in college and has written several articles about elder abuse and family manipulation. Her work is helping other young people recognize when their parents might be exploiting or manipulating older family members. You taught me that truth matters more than family peace, she told me during one of our long conversations. That lesson is going to guide everything I do with my life. Even my relationship with Robert has evolved into something I never expected. His letters from prison show genuine growth and understanding of what he did. He's working with other inmates on family reconciliation programs and has become an advocate for elder abuse prevention within the prison system. I know I may never earn your full forgiveness, he wrote in his most recent letter, but I want you to know that every day I work to become the son you raised me to be. Your strength and grace in forgiving me has given me hope that redemption is possible, even for someone who fell as far as I did. I do forgive him, though. Our relationship will never be what it once was. He's still my son, still the little boy I raised and loved, but he's also someone who hurt me in ways that changed us both forever. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending that serious harm wasn't done. Sarah's fate has been very different. She remains in prison unrepentant and bitter, blaming everyone except herself for the consequences of her choices. She has written to me several times demanding money and threatening new legal action letters that I simply forward to my attorney without response. Some people choose to learn from their mistakes. Others choose to be consumed by them. My work as an advocate has given me a sense of purpose that extends far beyond my personal recovery. I testify regularly before legislative committees about the need for stronger elder protection laws. I work with law enforcement agencies to train officers in recognizing sophisticated financial abuse. Most importantly, I mentor other seniors who are fighting similar battles, helping them understand that they have rights and resources even when their own families turn against them. Mrs. Johnson, a woman told me recently at one of my speaking engagements, your story gave me the courage to fight for my own inheritance when my stepchildren tried to manipulate my late husband's will. I kept thinking about how you never gave up, and it helped me find the strength to demand the truth. That connection, that ability to transform my own suffering into help for others, has given meaning to everything I endured. The pain wasn't pointless if it can prevent other families from experiencing similar destruction. My health has improved dramatically since the stress of the legal battle ended. I wake up each morning feeling energetic and purposeful, surrounded by beauty and authentic relationships. The fear and anxiety that dominated my life during those dark months have been replaced by confidence and peace. But perhaps the most profound change is in my understanding of what family really means. It's not about blood relationships or legal obligations. It's about truth, respect, support, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Some of my closest family members now are people who aren't related to me by birth, but who stood by me when I needed them most. Dr. Webb and Eleanor have become like siblings to me, part of a chosen family, built on shared values and mutual respect. The young historians who work at my research center feel like grandchildren eager to learn and carrying forward the values I hold dear. As I sit on my porch this evening watching the sunset over the land that my great-great-grandmother homesteaded and that I nearly lost to greed and manipulation, I feel a peace that I never thought possible during those dark months of imprisonment and despair. The journey was painful beyond anything I could have imagined, but it led me to this moment of profound contentment and purpose. I am surrounded by authentic love, meaningful work, and the knowledge that truth ultimately prevails, even when the battle seems hopeless. Today, as I sit in the garden that my great-grandmother planted over a century ago, I am filled with a peace that I never thought possible during those dark months when I was imprisoned in facilities and treated like a woman who had lost her mind. The roses she chose for their hardiness and beauty are blooming magnificently, their vibrant colors a testament to the endurance of beauty and truth through even the harshest seasons. My ancestral land is exactly what it was always meant to be, a sanctuary where family gathers, where history is preserved, and where the next generation learns the values that will guide them through their own challenges. Lisa brings her children here every weekend, and they run through the same fields where their great-grandfather played as a boy. The continuity of generations nearly broken by greed and manipulation has been restored through courage and truth. The work I do now as an advocate for elder rights gives profound meaning to every day. Last week, I testified before Congress about the need for stronger protections against inheritance fraud, sharing my story with lawmakers who have the power to prevent others from enduring what I experienced. The foundation I established has already helped hundreds of families navigate similar crises, providing them with the legal and emotional support I was fortunate enough to eventually receive. Through all of this, I have learned that my greatest strength was never my professional knowledge or my financial resources or even my capacity for love. My greatest strength was my refusal to accept lies as truth, my determination to fight for authentic relationships, even when doing so seemed impossible, and my faith that justice, though delayed, would ultimately prevail. The lesson I carry forward, and the one I hope others will learn from my story, is that family bonds built on truth and mutual respect are worth fighting for, but they cannot be forced or maintained through fear, guilt, or manipulation. Real love seeks the other person's genuine well-being and growth, not compliance or dependency. It acknowledges mistakes, forgives when possible, and grows stronger through addressing conflicts rather than avoiding them. Most importantly, I have learned that dignity and self-worth are not gifts that others can give or take away. They are inherent qualities that can be obscured by abuse, but never truly destroyed. No matter how completely others may try to erase you, your essence remains, your truth remains, your capacity for healing and growth remains. This story is my testament to the insidious nature of familial property theft and the profound cruelty of elder abuse, particularly when it targets cherished heritage and family legacy. But it is also proof that truth will ultimately prevail, that stolen legacies can be reclaimed even after profound betrayal, and that a life of purpose and authentic connection is always possible for those who have the courage to fight for it. I am Margaret, and I am 70 years old. I am a mother, grandmother, family archivist, survivor of systematic abuse, and advocate for others who face similar struggles. I am living proof that integrity and resilience can triumph over even the most ruthless greed, and that authentic happiness can emerge from even the deepest pain. My legacy is no longer one of professional achievements or preserved documents, but of courage, truth, and the transformative power of refusing to let others define your worth. This is my story, and it ends not with bitterness or regret, but with profound gratitude for a life reclaimed and relationships restored. It ends with hope for others who may be fighting similar battles, and with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always find a way to emerge.